Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. We're at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance. Let's go see what Cindy has for us today.
Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka, the director. Commander Johnson accomplished multiple Westpac tours in reconnaissance aircraft. These included 2 combat tours in the skies over Vietnam, eventually earning command of a vigilante squadron. He went on to serve as the 18th director of the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School. After his retirement from the United States Navy, he joined Northrop Corporation as Customer Requirements Manager on the B-2 program. Ladies and gentlemen, Commander Robert Johnson.
Thank you, Cindy, for that nice introduction. Air France 447 deep stall and thunderstorms. I learned of that on June 1st, 2009, and take great interest in it because I'll tell you of my experiences in thunderstorms. And so I followed it closely and put this presentation together over the years. Air France A330, wonderful airplane, beautiful airplane, built by Airbus, and I've flown in it many times in the back end as a passenger, and an Airbus test pilot told me that this was a very political accident report. And that means nothing can be wrong with the airplane. And there wasn't. There wasn't anything wrong with the airplane. Right down to impact, it ran just as designed. When I gave this presentation the first time, somebody in the audience said, "Do you think he's ever flown through a thunderstorm?" So I thought I'd better come up and let you know my credentials for giving this presentation. I've got BS Civil Engineering, MS Aeronautical Engineering, and a graduate of the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School. I also held 2 important positions as director of the school and head of carrier suitability testing during my Navy career. I also was asked to be the senior member on 3 accident boards, all fatal accidents. I've got quite a few flight hours, over 4,000, flew 45 different types of aircraft, and penetrated 3 severe thunderstorms, one at 41,000 feet, and I'll describe that in a little detail. And I'm a member of the Society of Experimental Test Pilots. So what prompted this paper? The BEA is the same as our NTSB for aircraft accidents in France, and their accident report I found lacking, and in some cases wrong. A lack of thunderstorm knowledge, and you can't understand what happened to Air France 447 without knowing about thunderstorms. A lack of aerodynamics knowledge. You can't understand what happened to 447 without having some aerodynamics knowledge. And one of the key ones was there were no pilots involved in writing the accident report. Human factors wrote it because the pilots union walked out. And of major importance, the aviation community accepted that report as factual, and everything I read now, Aviation Week, newspapers, flyers, on TV, they accepted it, the information in that report is factual, and are making decisions based on that report. When they first put together the accident board, normally there are pilots from the pilots union on the board. When they found out that they were minimizing the alleged shortcomings of stall warning systems on the airplane, they walked out. So we ended up with human factors people writing the report, and I'll comment on that as we go along. So here's the best description I found online, and it's nasty, nasty creatures. Everybody remembers that. And they're the granddaddy because everything you can think of bad in aviation weather is in a thunderstorm. Severe turbulence, structural and engine icing, lightning, although lightning on modern airplanes, when it hits them, doesn't hurt them. It knocks out your night vision when you're flying at night. And wind shear, which is what you experience when you're flying at altitude, and they call them airdrops or whatever, and huge and extreme up and down drafts. And I'll spend some time on that because it's key in this. Virtually any hazard to aviation you can imagine. Well, I went looking for drawings or pictures of a thunderstorm to put in this presentation. Well, I looked on Google, obviously, There's millions of them, and they're all wrong. So I said, I'm going to have to find something and modify it. So I found this one, and the wind can't go that way. So I thought I'd have a graphic artist friend of mine change it to something that makes sense. So we came up with this one, and you'll see thunderstorms start with warm, moist air going up and cooling off. The ones you see here in LA Basin are warm, moist air coming off the ocean. It reaches the mountains, it starts to go up, cools off, beautiful cumulus clouds start forming. And that evening on the news, you see there's thunderstorms with lightning to the east of here in the hills. And that's what happens when that warm, moist air comes across the land, gets warmer, and starts to rise and condenses and creates the thunderstorm. The other one is warm, moist air crossing the ocean, and the ocean warms it, and it starts to rise. And I'll explain those in a minute, but they're probably the biggest in comparison to those over land. So you see from the right of the chart, warm, moist air gets pushed up by a gust front, by mountains, or just the warm water it's passing over. So it starts up. As it goes up, it starts to cool, which gives off energy. Then it condenses, turns into raindrops. Some of it turns into ice pellets, and it continues up in this warm air. Goes higher, gives off more heat, goes up faster and higher, condensing more water, turning into ice. Up at the top, gravity takes over, and it starts down. But most of it now in a thunderstorm goes back up, caught up by this huge updraft. Same thing happens. Condensation gives off heat, rises faster, rises higher, gets colder, condenses more, gives off more heat, comes back down. Eventually, in a full-blown thunderstorm, this is rising at 90 miles per hour or 9,000 feet per minute. And it's huge, huger than this whole airport. And it's inside of it is the thunderstorm with the currents and wind shear and turbulence and rain, ice, supercooled water, which I'll describe later. And some of the ice pellets start picking up moisture, and each time they go around, more freezes on them, and they become hail. And eventually, some hail comes out, but it comes out from the front, but the majority of it comes down right in the thunderstorm area. Background resources. I was fortunate enough to remember a test pilot at the Naval Art Test Center years ago had done numerous thunderstorm penetrations. D.Z. Scala, when he was a Navy lieutenant, penetrated 200 times into thunderstorms. And as I researched more and more, it's the only real testing in severe thunderstorms that's available because none were done. I got many inputs from test pilot friends that said, oh, the Air Force did this and that. Actually, they had planned on it, but they ended up doing only lightning strikes. My personal experience, I flew through 3 severe thunderstorms, and I'll describe those. The accident report I read many, many times, and there wasn't a lot in there that was really useful as far as my presentation. And there's articles and videos. Everybody had an opinion after the accident. And then there's the official BEA animation, which shows the instrument panel, not the actual, but an animation of what was happening in the airplane, so you could better understand the accident report. However, I found it lacking and was fortunate enough to find one on YouTube by Corinne Soulis. And I'll show you a snapshot of that and why it shows better what actually happened to the airplane. And then you must all look at a NOVA video that they did about 6 months after the crash, because it has 2 things in it. One is a very, very in-depth analysis of the actual storm the airplane flew into, and a demonstration of supercooled water, where it turns to ice when any impurity hits it, and I'll describe that too. Then I went looking for other accidents, and lo and behold, I found numerous ones, which I'll show you pictures, It happened in 6 months only in 2015. So how about Lieutenant D.Z. Scala? I mentioned he's the only thunderstorm penetration expert. He was a project pilot on the F-3H Demon, had a J-71 engine. It was not the best engine. It was the last that was available, so they took it. However, at altitude, compressor stalls due to water and ice ingestion would affect the engine. So he made the penetrations, and he went through 8 hurricanes, but a hurricane is just a huge moving mass of air and no impact. But the test airplane did sustain considerable damage and had to be repaired. So when he was home at night, the phone would ring. They'd say there's a big thunderstorm northwest of Washington, D.C., and he'd go out, his airplane was ready, jump in, go out, fly back and forth through that thunderstorm. He gained the DFC, the Distinguished Flying Cross, for doing that work. Here's a picture of the airplane and the Demon itself, but the compressor is right here in the middle of the airplane, essentially, a little forward. And when that compressor would stall, all the pressure would be reduced. And that would allow the pressure in the burner section to blow flames out the front of the intake with a loud bang. And we couldn't have that with our latest, the Navy's latest, all-weather fighter that couldn't fly all weather. So after he was done, they had come up with fixes to make that happen. So in his report, he put in thunderstorm hazards. He defined them: severe turbulence, severe structural and engine icing, extreme updrafts up to 9,000 feet per minute, loaded with rain and hail. And these are all at altitude. And he said the heaviest precipitation and most severe turbulence occur in the upper levels. Very important point. He also defined the intensity. Rain, he says, warm, cold. I added supercooled. Light, individual water droplets, impact visible on the windshield. Moderate, windshield covered with water. Heavy, appearance of fire hose stream impact. I experienced that, and I'll show you where Air France 447 experienced that. Also accompanied by considerable noise. Very important point to remember when I'm discussing my experience and Air France 447 in the thunderstorm. So, supercooled water, I mentioned that. A lot of people in the audience come up and say, I didn't know that, and high school kids do it. And it can be super cool down to minus 55 degrees and still be pure liquid, but it's got to be pure water. And over the ocean, there's lots of pure water evaporating. Severe thunderstorms contain large amounts at altitude. That's in the FAA document on thunderstorms, which is the only real good document about thunderstorms. There's a lot of them out there by airplane companies, airlines that are just comic books. But read this one. It instantly freezes upon contact with an impurity. So what's an impurity? Well, the airplane. And freezing rain is supercooled water, and how many people in here have lived in St. Louis in the wintertime? There's one. Freezing rain will load up a tree so they break the branches off, they tear them, they tip them over, and worst of all, they accumulate on the electrical power lines and they snap. But the important point here is protuberances on aircraft, such as pitot tubes, I'll describe those, are the first to accumulate ice when you're flying through supercooled water. Anyway, I recommend you watch that NOVA on YouTube, and it's an excellent demonstration of supercooled water. So here's my experience. On the A3D Sky Warrior, we were flying out of San Diego on a night navigation flight to Oklahoma City. We took off, we leveled at about 39,000 and continued on towards Albuquerque. My bombardier in the right seat looked on the radar, and there was a huge string of thunderstorms crossing Albuquerque. He said, I don't think we're going to make it over it. I said, I'm invincible, I thought. I'm a lieutenant in the Navy, landing on carriers. What can hurt me? And I got a great airplane. So we proceeded on. And as we went into the haze, we felt like a flea on a huge light bulb, lightning under us everywhere. And then we got St. Elmo's fire, blue, sparkling, electric, like little sparks, are very blue and very good size, around each glass panel of the canopy. And then we went out, got out of it, and continued on to Oklahoma City. So we got there at that altitude, very hard for a jet to climb very fast. So we made a big turn, came back around while climbing up to 41,000. We were able to climb at about 200 feet per minute and got up to our altitude. My bombardier says, "We aren't going to make it over this time." And what he should have said was, "Bob, turn around." But he didn't. I was still invincible. And we flew into the haze. We got this beautiful St. Elmo's fire, all blue. And then it happened. Lightning hit the tip of that refueling probe, went down the probe, up on the wing, out the wing, down the pylon, forward on the nacelle, and into the engine. And nothing happened. Good old J-57. However, all of a sudden we were hit by liquid water sloshing all over the windscreen. I mean a lot of water, a lot of turbulence. And I had all I could do. We had a yoke in the airplane. I was flying it to keep wings level, or try to. We were going way up, and also using the nose, keep the nose down. And all I can do to get that airplane out of that cloud, and we finally came out. And I had full throttle on, and we were descending. And I checked the instruments, everything's looking good, and I looked out at the cities, and that altitude, they're just big, beautiful gold spots on the earth. Flagstaff, Arizona was right in front of us. It looked like it was underwater. Actually, we were covered with ice, so that's why it looked like it was underwater. Once the ice departed the airplane, we were able to level off, proceed to Miramar and land. The only thing that was damaged was the radome, was that painted black area right on the front. It looked like it had been eaten away by moths, but it was serious damage. We had to replace the nose cone. I mentioned attitude gyro, and for those of you that aren't pilots, it's a very, very important instrument. I had lost all my instruments except this one, is because it's independent, has nothing to do with the weather, and it works all the time in unusual attitudes. So I kept those wings going back through level at least, and the nose on the horizon or below. And it's very important. Don't forget attitude gyro. Okay, here's an example of water at altitude. Northwest A330 flying out of Hong Kong to Narita, Japan, 39,000 feet. They see on their weather radar that there's weather up ahead. It's green, which means moisture, but not dangerous. So they fly into it, and the next thing you know, the airplane's being pelted with raindrops, sound like rain hitting an aluminum garage door, and the cockpit got noticeably warm. Here's an example of the water coming up so fast that it hasn't had a chance to cool. Now, aerodynamics. Here's some simple aerodynamics. Don't want to bore you, but had one pilot had little trouble describing which arrow went up and which went down. So we put the weight of the airplane up where it is, all in one spot. That's center of gravity. Then the center of pressure, and that's the lift generated by the wing primarily, but also by the fuselage and nacelles. And I'll show you that shortly. And also, a lot of people don't realize there's a download on the horizontal tail to keep everything in balance, and the horizontal tail is an upside down wing. So that's how it does it. So, to describe, I mentioned the fuselage generated lift and can, and on the Super Connie, most of you remember, was designed by Kelly Johnson of the Skunk Works, and it carried 8% of the airplane's weight. the fuselage. So let's talk about cylinders like the A330 fuselage. Here's the sidewinder. Those little fins don't create any lift. They're to direct the airplane or keep it going straight. The fuselage, the missile itself, the cylinder, creates the lift. As long as I'm on the sidewinder, this is carried on the wingtips of F-18s. The pilot in Afghanistan decided to go through a thunderstorm. When he came out and landed, the lenses on the nose of each missile were gone, worn away. And those rascals run about 500,000 these days. A thunderstorm can do damage. So here's a real simple, thick airfoil in a wind tunnel. So how does a wing generate lift? You have the wind coming towards it. Right here, one molecule goes over the top, one molecule goes down the bottom. So in order to reach the back at the same time, you have to have that molecule going much faster over the top than the one on the bottom. And if it can't do that, it detaches from the wing and you get these big turbulent areas and there's no lift generated. So that is a completely stalled airfoil. So, coffin corner, some of you may have heard about that. The higher airplanes go, why, the closer they get to a stall and to an overspeed. Not much danger in the overspeed area, but the stall, you're fairly close to it, but not dangerous. People fly up there all the time. I just wanted to let you know there is, as you go higher and higher, you can get closer and closer. So, what is angle of attack? I'll be referring to that quite often. So you take the pitch, or actually it's the wing, whatever the wing is up, and the relative wind is the blue arrow. And it is what the airplane is feeling as wind. Not horizontal wind, but wind from down below. And so the airplane is going this direction down at that attitude. So that's angle of attack. And everything I'll be talking about, it describes that angle. So here's lift versus angle of attack. This is a thick airfoil at low altitude, so it's saying 10 degrees. You take a thinner airfoil at altitude, and it's only 2 to 3 degrees, but adequate for all the lift to carry the plane. Now, here you see the air detaching from the upper surface. And when it does that, it's making and breaking. It's attaching, detaching, attaching, detaching, and it shakes the airplane. And you can notice that it's onset buffet. Then, as you get higher and you're up 5 to 6 degrees at altitude, it detaches completely, and now that surface is stalled, and there's no lift when it's stalled, and it pitches down. And here's the fuselage. It has a curve just like this, only not nearly as big or high. The nacelles have one, even smaller, but they have one and have an effect. The horizontal tail has one, but it's inverted. It's upside down because its lift is going downward. Now the vertical tail, sitting up in the free stream, is like this, and as you move the rudder, you create a camber on the vertical tail, and it rolls this way. You do it the other way, and it rolls this way. And that's important in the upcoming charts. So let's talk about what happened early in the flight as they enter my elevator, my Thunderstorm elevator. Stall, 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 cricket, stall, cricket. Warning, hard to miss. So I ask people when I meet them, the pilot stalled the airplane, the accident report said. So I ask people, what is a stall? Well, they look at me and, well, loss of lift. I said, where? Well, the wing. They look at me kind of funny. Know my background. I said, what about the horizontal tail? And almost every pilot hasn't considered the horizontal tail. He thinks it's always working. But it did stall, and it can stall. Now, a deep stall, and there's only about 2 or 3 people on the internet that figured this out, both wing and horizontal tail are stalled. Is there warning buffet? Not if you're flying into my elevator, my Thunderstorm elevator. So let me show you. The airplane's flying at altitude, 35,000 feet. Everything's nice and fine. He gets into some turbulence entering the thunderstorm, and here comes my elevator, and it changes the angle of attack. And all of a sudden, both wing and horizontal tail are stalled. And now the airplane's going up in that elevator at 7,000 feet per minute. So, the report says the airplane went into a sustained stall, signaled by the stall warning and strong buffet. Well, if you read the report, there's no indication of stall warning except the stall. And the strong buffet, there's no indication. A lot of turbulence demonstrated by G's and so forth on the airplane. But there is no such thing as a sustained stall. The airplane's either stalled or it's in buffet. Here's what it looks like from the side, and it's a conventional tail deep stall. If you look at the leading edge of the wing, it looks like cotton. If you look at the leading edge of the horizontal tail, it looks like cotton again, and that means it's stalled. And the white lines are there just to show you the angle that the airplane is coming down. But look, the vertical tail's out in free stream. And the fuselage and the nacelles are creating enough lift to keep that airplane in a stall. And I've been reading where there's some effect, gyroscopic effect for the engines, and they were also at maximum thrust. So that creates what I analyzed it to be an airplane in a deep stall, but it's not going to pitch over or tumble. So let's talk about the actual accident. Beautiful airplane again. Now, pitot system. Big misunderstanding of pitot systems. It's a pressure sensing system, not a flow-through system. It was described as a flow-through system by a retired NTSB expert for Forbes magazine. It is changed into airspeed, vertical speed, and altimeter. And it takes that pressure, very, very accurate, and does that throughout flight. A330 has 3 of them. One for the pilot, the other pilot, the captain, and a standby. So they have 3 pitot tubes to feed 3 computers. And the computers vote when you're flying to decide what they're going to have the airplane do. So the accident report by BEA, they come up with the obstruction of a pitot tube by ice crystals. First time I've ever found them mentioned. It was hard to find any information on ice crystals because there's so few, but when highly specific climatic conditions are met, in particular with the presence of ice crystals in excessive quantities, I have no idea what that means. In the presence of ice crystals, there's no visible accretion of ice or frost on the outside, nor on the nose of the probe, and I kid you not, it says since the crystals bounce off these surfaces. The ice crystals can be ingested by the probe air intake. That's not so. The crystals accumulate in large numbers in the probe tube. You'd have to fly for months to get enough ice crystals in there, even if they could go in the probe. And it's heated. So, what are ice crystals? Well, they're not a hazard, certainly. You can't detect them by radar. You can only see them by the naked eye, and as you and I in this room, you see them in contrails, cirrus clouds, and if you go to a ski resort and you go outside at night, it's quite cold, and you see these little sparkles in the air, and that is ice crystals. And they call it diamond dust in the mountains. Cannot obstruct a pitot tube and cannot attach to the fuselage and create noise. That's the other thing in the report. I found a moment of disbelief that they cannot attach to the fuselage and create noise. However, supercooled water or water in a fire hose treatment creates a lot of noise, as I mentioned earlier. And ozone, the pilot in the right seat said, "What's that smell?" He thought they had an electrical problem. The guy in the left seat knew what it was. He says, "That's ozone." created by electrical discharge and is a normal aroma in thunderstorms. So, what they use for weather references? And we're getting to the points where I really got interested in doing this presentation. They said the cumulonimbi, and those are thunderstorms without thunder. This cluster had mostly already reached their stage of maturity, which was untrue. It was 4 major thunderstorms that had coalesced into one huge one, 250 miles wide. So, watch the NOVA video, and he does an excellent job of describing the thunderstorm. The presence of supercooled water is not very probable and would necessarily have been limited to small quantities. Here's the thing I reacted the most to in reading the reports, and it's not so. FAA says so in their document. DZ Scala and me all experienced maximum water at altitude. So they said the cause of the accident was obstruction of the pitot probes by ice crystals. And they take credit for saying this was a phenomenon that was known but misunderstood by the aviation community at the time of the accident. Unheard of. Nobody knows about that phenomenon or how it could affect an airplane. So, a little bit about the airplane. When the DC-9 was being built in the A320 by Airbus, Douglas decided to go with boiler gauges and levers, where the A320 was designed all electric, which meant that going out to the wings and the control surfaces were wires, and they actuated the pumps out there. So I picked these up on the internet. Everybody has a theory. There are many, many experts out there that decided here's why the airplane crashed. So the first one that most people picked up on was yokes versus side stick controllers. Here is a Boeing cockpit. You can see the yoke on the left, the yoke on the right. They steer. You pull them back and forth. You push the rudders. The controls on the other side do exactly the same thing. So you know what this pilot's doing and that one's doing. Also, while we're on this, I want to show you there's a little attitude gyro right there. So now the Airbus says, well, let's not do that. Let's take this little stick with wires to the computers, and it works just fine. They're flying all over the world. But you can see here that there's one there, and there's one over there. And when the seats are forward, they're way back now, it's a little difficult to see what the other pilot's doing because he has so little motion when he does it. So we'll go back. Side stick controllers cancel each other. There's a way where one pilot can be pushing full forward, the other one full back, and it neutralizes. Pitot tube replacement. It's quite a bit written. Airbus and the A330 had been having some problems with pitot tubes, and the plan was to change them out for a newer one when they went through check. And so some people said, well, if they'd had that new pitot tube, it wouldn't have happened. Well, I disagree. You got that pitot tube out there, it's minus 40 degrees centigrade in a thunderstorm, and supercooled water hits that probe and changes to ice. Takes a little while, not very long, for that pitot tube to melt that ice off. So no matter what pitot tube you would have, it's going to be blocked by supercooled water. The complaint the pilots had in the beginning, one of them was stall warning goes off below 60 knots. Well, it does. So it's saying stall, stall, stall. And you go below 60 knots, it stops. 60 knots is inaccurate, but it stops. And they think the pilots thought, uh-oh, we're out of the stall and we may exceed the speed on the airplane. So at one point, they pulled the throttles to idle and opened the huge speed brakes on the wing, but not for very long. Another few experts say there's no AOA display in the cockpit. I tend to think that'd be a good deal. Navy airplanes, we rely on it completely landing aboard ship because it's so very accurate. You'll hear the term TOGA, take off and go around. But the pilot flying with only 2,000 hours, he said, we're in TOGA, right? So he put the throttles in the TOGA detent, And at low altitude, when you're making practice landings and you touch down and you want to go around or you don't like your landing, you push the throttles up to about maximum toga and pull back a little bit on the stick or hold what you got, and the airplane leaps into the air. You have so much excess thrust with a light fuel load at low altitude. Now you try that at 35,000 feet. You add the power, the RPM goes up, doesn't have far to go. The airplane does not move. You pull back on the stick, it'll start to climb, but not very fast. If everything is perfect and they're not in a thunderstorm, you may get up to 1,000 feet per minute, which I think is high for a large airplane. So he's made the mistake of thinking they were in toga, which would account for his holding some backstick, not full backstick like the accident report and others report. One anonymous A330 pilot, he says it's like playing a video game, the cockpit. Now, what really happened to the A330, Air France 447? Here they were down in Rio de Janeiro. They'd been staying there for 3 days. It must be nice, but 3 days in Rio. The captain had his girlfriend along. The most junior pilot had his wife along. So at the airport, the captain was heard saying and recorded, "I only had 1 hour of sleep last night. That's not enough." And I don't know about you, but 1 hour of sleep is just enough to finish me off because it's hard to wake up again. Anyway, they fly up north making reports, and about 2:14, the last transmission. So here they are. If you look real closely, you'll see a black line from the bottom going up in a slight turn to the right. That's their projected path. So here they are, down at the bottom. They're approaching this thunderstorm. Captain's in the left seat, junior pilot, 2,000 hours in the right seat. And he's supposedly flying the airplane, although it's all hands off. And the captain, it's indicated that he had left the radar for weather in the calibrate position, so I have to assume he was looking at that storm. Anyway, they get some turbulence, they get through it, and they get on the other side. The captain says, "I'm going to go back for my rest now." There's a question in the report that says, knowing that those storms are circle the Earth on the equator all year round, he didn't wait 15 more minutes to transit that area. But he did. And wasn't making a lot of sense, but he called up the second pilot, second co-pilot. Now, he's got more hours than the junior pilot, but one article I read said he was just maintaining his currency by going along on this flight. So they proceeded into the thunderstorm. Let me show you at the bottom. You'll see a band of colors. The purple on the right, you don't see in that thunderstorm. That's like flying underwater. So let's look at the black and white. There's a lot there, and that's almost as bad, and they're headed right into a major mass. Now, 3 other airliners transiting that area detoured around 80 to 90 miles and climbed to different altitudes to go around that storm. Perfectly obvious to them, but our crew didn't notice it. The number 2 pilot climbs in the captain's seat. He looks down, sees the radar, is in calibrate, puts it onto max gain, and he had to have seen nothing but solid red. So they're at 35,000 feet. Outside air temperature in thunderstorms, because of the updraft, it gets warmer. It's minus 40 degrees. They're in the clouds. The zone they go through, that's all these thunderstorms all year round circling the Earth, is called the Intertropical Convergence Zone, or the ITCZ. Pilot sitting in the left seat turned the weather radar from calibrate to max gain. That's where he must have seen solid red, because he says to the pilot flying, "You might want to come left 12 degrees. The pilot flying reaches up and turns a knob. The airplane turns left 12 degrees. Turbulence increased. That's a minute later. Aroma fills the cockpit. and that's the ozone. Slipstream becomes louder. That's the fire hose. Autopilot and auto thrust disengage. The pitos are blocked by supercooled water. Pilot flying said we've lost the speeds. So now, all of a sudden, they're at 7,000 feet per minute climb, well beyond the aircraft capability, but the accident report says the guy in the right seat pulled back on the stick to change, I kid you not, to convert kinetic energy into potential energy and climb at 7,000 feet per minute. Absolutely not true. The airplane couldn't do it on a clear, best day. Anyway, stall warning happens just as they get hit by my thunderstorm elevator. Stall, cricket, stall, cricket. And the airspeed goes down to 60. And it stops. The warning stops. Now they're fully stalled, complete stall, deep stall, and no sound. The angle of attack averages 40 degrees and never goes below 35, according to the report, but it does go up to higher than 40 on occasion. So now they're in a deep stall with a rate of descent over 10,000 feet per minute. So here it is, and looking from the side, you can see the blue line where the airplane's flying. The captain leaves the cockpit right here. Not a good idea, but he did. So they're flying along. The airplane loses its speeds. The airplane goes up on my 7,000 feet per minute for about half a minute. Gets to 3,500 feet. It's completely stalled, and it starts to fall. It's not flying, it's falling. And it goes down. The captain arrives here. He says, "What the blank is going on?" Words to that effect. And they said, "We've lost control. We've tried everything. We don't know what to do." And they didn't. So they said, "What do we do?" The captain says, "I don't know." Even though the minimum he had was that small attitude gyro, which showed he was nose high, 16 to 18 degrees, but he had two other attitude gyros that are on the screens, but for some reason they may not have been perfect, but he still had that small one. He said, "I don't know." He didn't recognize the situation he was in, and they were in what we called in the training command an unusual attitude. So when we'd be flying in the training command or under a bag in the back, the instructor would say, "Put your head to the left and put your nose down," and this was to disorient your inner ear. Then he would pull up the airplane, pull down the airplane, negative G's, something, and all of a sudden he'd say, "You got it." First thing you looked at, attitude gyro. If your nose was high, you rolled to the horizon, got it down to the horizon, and leveled off. Every time. I asked 747 pilots, what were you supposed to do if you get into an unusual attitude? Roll with rudder. Roll with rudder. So at that time, the pilot in the right seat, still in control, he says, "It's rolling right, and I've got it full left. What do I do?" And he says, "Try the rudder." That little comment took me forever to find, but it's there. He did. He's coming down like this, not flying, he's falling at an angle. The airplane's rolling like this. He said, "Try the rudder." He puts in left rudder, overshoots obviously, but then he keeps it going like this. So here we've got the airplane going down like this, deep stall, but it is wallowing. That's the Boeing test pilot told me. He said that's the term they use, is it was doing this, wallowing. And partly due to his using the rudder, but partly due to lift not being consistent because you're getting it from the fuselage and themselves. And a little bit of gyroscopic action from the engines, and they're at maximum thrust, providing a vector. So at one point, the airplane's nose goes below the horizon. A bunch of pilots jumped on that and said, "Oh," that's when the guy in the left seat control pushed the stick forward and it responded. No, it did not respond. It couldn't respond. The horizontal tail completely stalled, and the angle of attack was still 40 degrees with the nose below the horizon. So here we go, descent angle of attack values. I wanted to show you this. Here's the 40 degrees on the far left. And that's how they were descending along this black line. But eventually, prior to impact, they get much higher. And I took this chart from off the internet to show you the airplane is still falling. But look at the horizontal tail. At 40 degrees angle of attack, the horizontal tail, the pilot in the right seat, by not yanking back on the stick, but by flailing around with the stick in roll, but also he'd go forward, but he'd also come back for the majority of the time. And the airplane says, I'll help you out. I'll trim it to 13 degrees nose up. But even so, at 13 degrees nose up, at 40 degrees angle of attack, the angle of attack on the tail is 27 degrees. Totally stalled. Totally stalled. So here's the tail. And look at the attitude. That's the airplane fuselage, or wing. Anyway, it's full down, and here again, I'm showing you this purple line or black line. Angle of attack's 40 degrees. But the wind, when it hits this airfoil, like I showed you early, can't make it around the turn and stay attached, so it's not providing any downward lift, and the camber is on the bottom side, what camber there is. So it's impossible for the tail to have any effect, no matter what the pilot did. So here's that snapshot of the Korean Sulas animation, which is quite good. I recommend you watch it, but I've watched it up to 10 times, and you have to stop and look at one or two things at the same time. However, you see here, here's the airspeed, here's the attitude gyro, altitude, rate of climb, trim on the horizontal tail, engines, but here's the angle of attack. That's not in the BEA animation, except in the upper right-hand corner you can hardly see. And here's the G's they're experiencing. And this is not buffet. That is turbulence, severe turbulence. And here's the pilot on the right. So I recommend you watch it. You can see in the up here, here's the pilot not flying, and here's the pilot flying. And you'll see him going back and forth, right and left, and a little bit back, some forward, a little bit back. So now let's talk about another airplane. A320 AirAsia, flying out of Surabaya to Singapore, I believe. And he takes off. They're used to flying in weather. And you can see the purple I mentioned. You don't want to go in there. That is like flying underwater. So he takes off, he's flying, he gets up into this region, and there's a lot of black and white ahead, and he calls and he says, and he's approached the line of thunderstorms, he's been watching his weather radar, obviously, and he said, I want to turn left and climb to 380. That's 6,000 feet from 32,000. ATC deferred because of other aircraft in the vicinity. Being a good pilot and a good man, he didn't change heading or climb. 2 minutes later, they said, okay, you can go to 340. Well, 340 is hardly anything and no heading change. So it was too late. And I have to say that ATC could not see the weather. So they're just looking at your symbols on a screen describing your airplane and its situation and the other airplanes. There's plenty of room up there. You don't have to worry. But 3 minutes later, the aircraft climbed to flight level 370 in 54 seconds. It's going up at 6,000 feet per minute in the Thunderstorm elevator. And then he began to descend, turning to the left up to 109 degrees. So he had stalled, the airplane went down, down he went. The plane, and then, best comment I found, the plane can't go beyond its built-in capability. It's possible that a very powerful updraft could bring the aircraft up to that position. So, confirmation that the Thunderstorm elevator does exist. So let's talk about Boeing 747. Flying out of Detroit to Beijing. Anyway, you see the damage to the nose. But if you look closely at the wing rut down on the left, you'll see damage there. Actually, there was damage all over the airplane. It was so damaged, they flew it to the boneyard. So how'd that happen? The crew saw fast-building thunderstorms, and their weather radar confirmed it. The plane rolled, pitched, and yawed, seeming luggage coming out of the overhead. After they landed, the captain told him he was unable to get permission from China ATC to fly around the weather. Should have gone around it, couldn't go over it. Excessive damage. This one is a real shocker. A320, he was going to Salt Lake City, and he advised ATC, my weather radar is inoperative. But ATC didn't tell him, we can't see the thunderstorms, so in he goes. Look at the hail did to his windscreen and nose, and again, on the left there, above the engine, you'll see damage. So it had quite a bit of damage and ended up going into Denver. Here's a brand new 787 in Beijing Boeing Dreamliner. I've been told it's got 2 weather radars, but they flew right into a thunderstorm and damaged the nose and the windscreen up on the right side there. And they said, well, let's fly it back to Dallas and put a new nose cone on and a new glass panel and show it to the employees. Well, when they landed, not only was the nose cone and the windshield damaged, they had broken wing lights, damaged component panels, damaged tail and engine cowlings, damaged wing leading edges. All of those had to be removed from the airplane and sent to Wichita for repair. So, I mentioned that I was very unhappy that the aviation industry is accepting this accident report as truthful, or actual, let's say actual. Anyway, I found this article, and it's a bunch of radar companies got together and said, we need to invent something that can see these ice crystals, because he's only got 15 seconds to do something. So they had a big meeting. And nothing wrong with the weather radar. People use it every day. As long as they know how to use it, how to read it, perfectly good. Every airplane you fly, especially on the East Coast, they're going in between thunderstorms all the time. So the ice crystals theory is creating some damage here. So what are the misconceptions? A lot of people call it weather radar. No, it's weather avoidance radar. Secondly, modern transport aircraft are capable of penetrating thunderstorms. They are not. They don't have the structural design and sufficient maneuverability. And by maneuverability, it's when you're experiencing all this turbulence, it's the ability to maneuver the airplane so you can get out of there or save the airplane. They don't have enough of that. And you must follow ATC directions. So I did some reading up on that, and if you feel you're endangering the aircraft and passengers, tell them unable and do what you want to do. They can maneuver airplanes around you. And ATC cannot see the weather. Good friend of mine going back to Oshkosh 2 years ago. He's at altitude, 25,000, I think. Thunderstorm up ahead. He told ATC, he said, I'm going to come right about 40 degrees. And they said negative. He said, well, I'm going anyway, because he'd heard my talk a few weeks prior. They said, fine, call this number when you land. So he called that number, and the guy says, you didn't follow my ATC director's instructions. And he says, well, there was a thunderstorm ahead, and I'm not going into it. Well, don't let it happen again. Now, so what are the lessons learned by me and should be learned by a lot of people on doing all of this research? The best document is right here. Read it and understand it. No comics in there. It's very good. Pictures of a thunderstorm are very good, but the rest of it is. And do not try to outclimb them. As I found flying from Oklahoma City, It was climbing faster than my airplane could. So you're supposed to stay 20 nautical miles laterally from a thunderstorm and 10,000 feet clearly above to go past them or over them. Ensure your radar is operable and know how to use it. Right away after the accident, everybody said, well, we got to teach stall training. Well, great, but not at 35,000 feet. And so do not follow ATC directions into a thunderstorm. Be the pilot in command. Very specific. You're responsible for that airplane and those people. And ATC can adjust to you. Another good friend flying into New York in a jet, 30-some thousand, he said, we want to change heading here to go around some storms, and they said negative. So they went into holding, which is a racetrack pattern. They said, we're right here. As soon as you find a place for us to go, bingo. They found a place for them to go. And so I had a question last time I gave this, and it said, where could the airplane have been saved? And as it went into the thunderstorm, and it got hit by the elevator going up 7,000 feet per minute, now it's fully stalled, the airplane reaches, I think, 37.5, 38.5, and it starts down and wallowing. The pilot, the captain, comes from behind, and he says, it's rolling right, I can't stop it. He says, use the rudder. The only thing he could have done was to let it roll. In fact, put in rudder and make it roll. So now the airplane is doing side slip, we call it, picking up lift, and it's going down. But it's already started at 10,000 feet per minute, so now you're increasing your speed and picking up speed and lift, but you got another problem. You don't have enough altitude to pull out. Once you reach speed, you can only pull so many G's, and the airplane's going down, and so they were stuck. But no, that was the only opportunity. And a test pilot like me, practicing it daytime over and over, practicing at nighttime over and over, and then going into a thunderstorm and practicing, still would be too difficult to recover.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Seniors Out and About. I'm Betty Wheaton. See you next time.